This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 536, Composer Patches 2.0. On today's show, we're talking about Patching Drupal, Composer, and Composer Patches 2.0 with our guest, Cameron Eagans. We'll also cover configuration development as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Cameron Eagans. Cameron is an engineering leader and full-stack software engineer based in Boise, Idaho, with over 15 years of experience building and leading large-scale software projects across a variety of industries. He's worked with organizations ranging from NASA and NOAA to NBC Universal and the ACLU. And he maintains several widely used open source projects in PHP and Drupal ecosystem. He also maintains several widely used open source projects in the PHP and Drupal ecosystem that have been downloaded nearly 90 million with an M times to date. Cameron, welcome to the show and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I will note as the scheduler for this show way overdue because I think like everybody and their mother uses Composer patches. So we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I apologize for it taking us so long to get you on to talk with you. All right. I am John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-hosts are joining us for the second week. Andy Giles, co-founder at DripYard.
What's up?
And last but certainly not least, Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development.
Happy to be here. Looking forward to hearing about Composer Patches 2.0.
And now, to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a principal solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, John. Do you maintain modules that provide configuration files? There's a module that can help manage them. It's called Configuration Development, and it was created in April of 2024 by CHX, though recent releases are by Joachim. Now, it has an 8.x-1.11 version available, which works with Drupal 9.3, 10, and 11, and it is actively maintained and has both security and test coverage. The project has 36 open issues, 7 of which are bugs, and it is in use by almost 2,400 sites according to Drupal.org. Now, the module really provides 3 useful features. First, it can ensure that specific configuration files are automatically imported on every request as though the contents were pasted into the Drupal core single import form. Second, it can automatically export specific configuration objects into files whenever the object is updated. You provide a list of file names and the module will derive the objects that need to be exported. Finally, it provides a drush command that can be used to generate all the necessary configuration files for a specific project. You put a list of the files into the project's info.yaml file, and then with a single command, a fresh copy of all the specified files will be generated and placed directly into the project's configuration folder. Now, for obvious reasons, this is not something you should ever have enabled in production, so definitely a best practice to pull this into your project would be using the require-dev composer command. But let's talk about configuration development.
Was this just a coincidence, or did you just find out about this morning from Slack?
I did find out about this morning in Drupal Slack, yes.
Yeah, so I think it'd be interesting to talk about one of the reasons why you would want this, and that is helping keep if you have a contributor or custom module that needs, I think, optional or required config synced, it's a nice way to do that, right? Is that the use case you were using it for?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and there also was some discussion in that thread about potentially using this with recipes, which I think is possibly even more useful.
Yep.
There is an issue on the project to make it work with recipes. It is an MR that does currently require some work. So if that is something you'd want to use this project for, by all means, jump in and help that get ready to merge.
Can we provide a more, tangible example? Because I'm struggling a little bit here. Like, are we talking about like, hey, I am a module developer. My module requires like certain fields on certain content types. I can kind of like export, import the config and help with my development flow like that.
Yeah, probably a good place to start is the example where this came up. So there's an issue that I will confess has been kicking around for too long on the storage module, which we've talked about on the show, which provides its own view configuration for being able to manage all of your existing storage entities. Now, that view was exported probably before Drupal 10, hasn't been updated in the provided configuration file to follow the reordering that was done as part of, I'm pretty sure it was Drupal 10. And so I think it was you, Nick, who pointed out that after doing an export, it'll show as being different, even though there aren't really any changes to the view. So having a module like this for a project like storage, I could just, before I, do some kind of a configuration change, I can run a drush command to say, just update or regenerate the configuration file, and then it'll automatically generate it out. Whereas previously, the kind of workflow that I would do, which is kind of clunky, is update, let's say, the view that has that configuration imported. I'd go through the Drupal UI and update it, and then do a full site export, and then have to pick through that to find the individual view configuration file and then copy that into the proper place in the project. So having a single drush command, or even potentially having the module itself configured to, whenever that view gets saved, automatically update the view configuration file, is a pretty big convenience, I think, for developers who maintain these kinds of projects.
Definitely cuts down on that workflow too, because once that config updates, you do the export and then you can see it in Git. You gotta. That definitely makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think the module's really helpful if you're doing migrations. So I'll typically create like a migrate module for the project I'm working on, and then I'll have all of the config in that module, and then have config devil track that. So then as I'm iterating on the migration, it's tracking it and importing the config.
That's what the import is useful for. I was wondering what that part was useful for.
Yeah, and then also if you have, there's like a series of drush commands that comes with it, and you can import like a one-off config. So if you have a config somewhere that you want to import, you just drush CDI1, point it to the file, and then it pops it in. So it's really helpful to kind of get things in and out, like one at a time.
Drush CDI1.
CDI1.
That's a drush command for the module.
Yeah, config devil import 1, I guess, is the acronym. And so, you just point it to a single config file, and then it'll bring it in.
And it's probably 1 because it's one file.
Yeah.
If I had to guess.
So there is no 2, 3, 4.
I think you can import a whole directory.
But
that's just the one that I seem to always use, is because I want like a specific config file imported.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I love every time I talk about the config system in Drupal. Like, I really do. I just love it. I love how easy it makes things. But, with great power comes great responsibility. Anyway, Martin, thank you again for bringing us a super interesting module of the week. And if folks wanted to suggest a module of the week, talk about this module of the week, or just connect with you, how could they go about doing that?
Definitely always happy to have spirited conversations about potential candidates for module of the week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as ManClue on all of the Drupal and social platforms. But I did also want to say a quick happy birthday to Drupal, which is turning 25 in 2 days from this recording. So congratulations to Drupal and the community, and 25 incredible years.
Yeah, Thursday will be 25. My goodness. That's a long-running project. Hopefully we get another 25 years out of this. And I'm curious to know what Drupal will look like at its 50th birthday.
That's right.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's doing pretty good. At 25 right now, it's AI native. It's got Canvas on the horizon here of being a layout tool in core. We just talked about config. A lot of things moving in a very, very positive direction.
And it can rent a car.
And it can, it could, anyway, yes, it can rent a car. It can also drive a car, maybe. Anyway.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Hey, listen, happy birthday to Drupal. I would say that there are going to be some parties throughout the world to celebrate this momentous occasion. So I look forward to hitting one of those up, maybe.
Yeah, there's a few listed on the events page, community events page on Drupal.org. But of course, by the time people hear this, only our Patreons will have heard it in time, unfortunately. So,
all right. Well, Martin, thanks again, and we'll chat with you next week.
See you then.
All right, Cameron. Before we jump into specifically Composer Patches 2.0 and all the great new stuff that's happening there. Can you just give us kind of an overview of what Composer Patches does?
Sure. So I imagine we've all used Composer. It's it's kind of a way to describe in a declarative way the dependencies of your project. Composer Patches extends Composer so that you can sort of declaratively say what changes you want to apply to those dependencies that are necessary to make your project run. I'm sure we've all had core patches or whatever that our modules depended on. So that's what Composer Patches enables is changing dependencies in your project to fix bugs or add features or whatever without necessarily requiring upstream changes.
And if you remember, this is in contrast to, there's a big mantra in Drupal, right? Don't hack core, right? And I think one of the big reasons for that was because you didn't have a way to know what changed before. I mean, with Git, you could see some history and stuff, but you used to have to use the hacked module to like evaluate a project and see what was changed. And I've certainly still occasionally see projects where people just directly change core and apply those changes each time. But one of the huge aside from, I think the declarative aspect of like, these are the changes I've made is one of the major benefits, because I can, on an old project or a new project that I didn't maintain, I can look at it and see what issues that particular project is importing and kind of track the progress and see if there's something I can contribute to, right? I think that's one of the biggest advantages of it, is being able to declaratively say, these are the changes you should look at when you're updating. These are the features you should test.
Well, I mean, I think also to your point there, Nick, like for me, it feels like a cleaner, right, more well-organized way of replacing like the patch directory that everybody used to have in their projects, right? Like you would basically, pull a patch, you'd drop it in this directory, you'd apply it with Git, and you'd be like, yay, we patched, this module or core or whatever it was, right? And you'd have a list of these patches in your directory. At least now you go into your Composer JSON file and say like, oh, here's the thing, here's a little title that tells you like why this was necessary, and you have a link out to the patch, or you can keep the patch locally if you want to do it that way. But like, I don't know, it feels better organized, right?
It also gives you ordering of the patches, which is really important and requires some effort to do with the patch directory.
Yep.
Actually, you'd have to either name your patches like 1_ whatever the patch is .patch, or script it.
And you can provide
the same order no matter what.
And you can provide more metadata too. Like one thing I've taken to doing is just when it's a Drupal patch, just providing a link back to the Drupal issue. Mm-hmm. Where it's being tracked. So I no longer have to like find, okay, what was this one? Where was it? Like you can provide a title and a link. And so I do that for, even if it's a GitHub project, right? It's not a Drupal module or something.
I will also say it makes updating modules a lot easier too, because now, like, again, previously you'd have this patch folder, and like, depending on how you organized it, maybe what patches went to what module and whatnot, but maybe you didn't. I don't know. Depends on how you did it, right? Like one of my favorite things to do is like, oh, Composer update this module. And then it's like, I can't do that. And you're like, oh, I have a patch on it. Here it is, right in my Composer file. Let me remove it. Like, I don't know. Just makes things better and cleaner. And I'm a big fan of that.
So one thing that I'm curious about, your bio, you mentioned that you maintain some PHP projects that have been downloaded over 90 million times, and Composer Patches alone was downloaded nearly 88,900,000 something times. And it's used by many, many more communities than just Drupal. I'm curious, what is it like maintaining a project with that many users, that many installs? Obviously, each install doesn't equate to one single user, but what's it like maintaining a project that has such a broad base?
It's stressful, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but the how widely this project is installed is one of the reasons it got rewritten for 2.0 in the first place, which may sound a little counterintuitive, but we'll come back to that. But if you have a project that's used by like 10 people and you break a workflow, you might affect like 1 or 2 people, right? If you have a project and it's used by millions of people and you break a workflow, you're breaking millions of people's workflows.
Yeah.
Right? And it's cumulative install, so it's more realistically like thousands of people, but like it's stressful, and having good test coverage and a good community around it makes it a little easier.
Well, I'd like to dig into that a little bit because how does the community aspect of this work? Because we're all from the Drupal community. You're originally from the Drupal community, I think, and we're all pretty heavily involved in Drupal. Where I'm used to that, and I feel like whenever I step outside of Drupal, sometimes there's a community. It's like hit or miss, right? But usually, if there's a community, there's like a separate hub for that community. So where does the community for like Composer patches, that ecosystem, kind of live? Is it just in GitHub, or is there a Discord, or like how does that work? Or are you just talking about kind of like the Drupal community or the WordPress community, or like the separate communities that use the tool?
Well, it's a little of both. The primary users of the plugin are like the Drupal community, and to a lesser extent the Typo 3 community in Magneto, I think, or Magento. I don't remember.
Magento.
But those communities have pretty well developed ideas of how they want to work and how they want their tooling to work. And being able to lean on that kind of shared idea is helpful for me. I don't have to invent everything from scratch. These people know what they're doing, so let's just sort of take the best out of all those communities and sort of codify them into a Composer plugin. There's also other communities that use this plugin. WordPress is like, there's a few users who are doing WordPress stuff with this plugin, and they don't have quite as well defined ways of working. But the fact that they are opening issues and reporting bugs and things like that's also helpful. I can imagine all day long how I want a patching plugin to work, but ultimately it needs to work for the people that are using it.
I will just point out that saying that they don't have a well-defined way is a very kind way of stating how the WordPress community works currently with deployments and code management. It's the
Yeah.
I would personally say that the lack of a kind of standardized process for that is one of the greatest detriments, because I do WordPress development too, and the lack of like a standardized, I just appreciate the Drupal community's deployment and development first attitude when it comes to that, because it makes things like this so easy. With WordPress, it runs the gamut. Some plugins don't support Composer whatsoever. Like you literally can't install it with Composer. They don't have a public access point. So yeah, it's a very different approach.
Yeah, and
I built my first WordPress site not too long ago. Like my website is WordPress, and that was the first actual WordPress site I built, and it was painful coming from the Drupal world.
So, as somebody who's used your plugin since I stopped doing Drush Make to build my projects, I got to say thank you first and foremost. And then secondly, where did the idea come from for Composer patches?
Drush Make, actually.
Yeah, nice.
That was the origin. So I think it was 2014. No, you know what? I started at NBC December of 2014, and NBC had an internal Drupal 7 distribution for their various brands, Telemundo, Sci-Fi, etc. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So they have this Drupal 7 distribution. They've been working on it for a few years, and Drupal 8 is in like an early alpha. And the goal that this team was given was to port this Drupal 7 distribution to Drupal 8 in the very early stages of Drupal 8's development, so that we sort of like maximize the amount of time that we can use this application before we need to upgrade it to another version of Drupal. But unfortunately, that was like right in the middle of all of the, if you remember from that time in the Drupal community, we were trying to figure out how to use Composer to work on things. We had some people just randomly submitting modules to Packagist. We had people with a repository stanza that was about 9 miles long.
Oh my goodness, I forgot about that.
Yeah, like individual Git repositories for each module in the repository stanza in your composer.json was not a fun way to work. So I worked on 2 projects right around that time to sort of enable the team to work on an early Drupal 8 alpha. One of them was Composer patches. So the Drupal 7 based distribution that they had heavily relied on Drush Make. There were patches for about every module we had imported and in core. So it was pretty clear that we were going to need that kind of capability for the Drupal 8 distribution as well. And we especially needed it for core because it was still in flux. So the first version of this was a couple days that it was a spike in our issue tracker. We spent a couple days, building out this proof of concept, and I got a little bit more time to to clean it up and make it, more broadly usable. That's where the first version came from. And I think actually, if you look at the commit log, the first commit is something around the lines of like initial import into Pub Central or something like that. And that was the name of the distribution at NBC. Yeah. So it was like a subtree split out of that repository.
And why was the decision made to do it on GitHub rather than, if it was a Drupal project and a Drupal thing, was it just because it wasn't a Drupal module and you decided to put it there? Was it because it was a Composer plugin and Composer was on GitHub? Was there a specific reason, or?
Well, it wasn't Drupal specific, for one thing. It was a Composer plugin, and the pattern for other Composer plugins at the time was they lived on GitHub. The other thing was that Drupal.org didn't have really a good place for this to live. We could call it a module, but it really wasn't a module.
Yep.
I think at the time there was like a utility project or something like that some people had access to create, but that it didn't really fit. So
yeah,
GitHub was kind of a better target.
So I had a question in here to ask if it was a Drupal specific utility to start, but clearly it was, because that was the project you were working on. How much of an effort was it to kind of broaden that to other Composer based projects, or was it just kind of worked the way that it worked no matter what?
Well, I wouldn't say that it was made as a Drupal specific utility. There was nothing in even the very first commit that was pinned to Drupal. It was for a Drupal project at the time, but it was just plain PHP plugged into Composer. I apologize. I have spaced on the second part of your question.
I was just curious. Actually, I guess the second part of my question doesn't necessarily matter, because it sounds like you just answered it. It was more PHP working with Composer. So I would imagine that other projects using Composer were able to just kind of pick it up and run with it, as opposed to needing to do anything different or specific.
Yeah, pretty much.
So let's focus in a little bit more on Composer patches 2.0, right? So clearly, 1.0 had come out a while ago, right? And it is very widely used, as we've talked about. I'm curious why you felt that A, it needed to be updated, and B, why now was the time for that.
Yeah. So after we released Composer patches publicly, we sort of added a few features, and it got up to a 1. I think like the 1.3-ish release was when I started thinking about 2.0. By then, a fair amount of the Drupal community.
How long ago was that?
2015, 16, somewhere thereabouts.
Okay. So you've been thinking about 2.0 for a while now.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Composer patches 2.0 was like almost 10 years in the making.
Fabulous.
It was the Duke Nukem Forever of Composer patches releases.
Awesome.
So with as many users as I had in the Drupal community, the lack of test coverage, the lack of well-defined, that this is what we do support and this is what we don't support. Like there weren't any guardrails or boundaries to the project at all. And there was I actually struggled with a lot of guilt on that for a while. Like, these things are broken and I don't really have a safe way to fix them. Where I can guarantee that I am fixing somebody's workflow and I'm not breaking somebody else's workflow. So I started kind of.
Can we pause for 1 second here and talk, maybe expand a little, because this is I think I know some of these details, but can we expand a little bit on what you mean? Because yes, we know this is used by a lot of people, but I think most of the people listening to the show are really just using it in the Drupal way, right? They're finding a patch file or diff on Drupal.org, adding that line to the whatever Drupal / whatever the module name is, and then putting a little thing. And at a high level, it sounds very simple. Like, it downloads Composer, and then it downloads the project, and then applies this patch, and you're done. And if it doesn't apply, it says, "Hey, I couldn't apply it," and you're done. I have a feeling, just generally knowing how things work, and based on what you've been saying, that there's a lot of hidden complexity, and there's a lot of weird things that people do with this project. Can you maybe, as you're answering this question, can you maybe step aside for a second and tell us, like, what kinds of workflows were breaking, or what kinds of bugs were you trying to fix, just so our listeners know some of the underlying complexity?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't anything particularly exotic or strange, right? It was if you have a project with a module and a patch on that module, and you want to update the module and update the patch. You have to do one or the other first, right? So you're probably going to update the module first. You go bump the version constraint and you run your composer commands and it pulls down the new module. I would expect that the old patch would fail. So you've updated this module, you haven't updated the old patch. So that first composer update fails.
Yes.
So then you go update your patch. How do you get the new patch to apply?
You run install again, I assume? I mean, that's what I do, right? Wait, how else could you do it?
That works. You mean that works for like 90% of people. That works for 90% of people. And in other cases, they'll go run that composer install and it just won't do anything.
Really?
Yeah. And I had no idea why. I could never reproduce it, but I had like composer install logs from like dozens of people where, these are the specific steps that I took and here's how I reproduce it reliably on my machine. And then like I couldn't come in and figure it out and fix it.
Did you ever figure it out or no? Those. You've never figured it out?
No.
So it's just a mystery? Oh,
no,
God.
I have no idea.
Those are the worst.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're worried about introducing new bugs like that, it sounds like, or breaking something.
Yeah.
Because, okay.
The conclusion that I kind of came to was Composer Patches 1.0 tried to just handle everything with minimal intervention. It was supposed to be as declarative as possible, and there were a few config flags that you could put in your composer.json, but for the most part, it was supposed to just work.
You accomplished that mission.
Sort of just work. Well, I don't think I did in 1.0, but 2.0 is closer at least.
Okay.
But the sort of like implicit behaviors, I think, were where a lot of those bugs came from. So my goal in 2.0 was, we need to make some of these behaviors and workflows more explicit. You know what this plugin is doing, and there's no question about, has it done the thing or is it going to do the thing? Like when you tell it to do the thing, it should just do the thing.
So that also makes debugging easier for you because you can isolate what stage is breaking for a particular person, right?
Exactly.
So that's one feature, or maybe you could call it functionality that's coming for Composer Patches 2.0. Are there other than kind of like stability or debugging or kind of just general refactoring, are there other new features coming with 2.0?
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff. If you're interacting with it as a developer, building like other Composer plugins, there are some API extension points for adding functionality to Composer Patches itself. There's a couple of like nice command line commands that are provided to Composer so that you can run like the repatch process after you update your composer.json or whatever. There's also the patches.lock.json to sort of lock all the SHA sums of your patches and store some extra metadata. Like I don't know if you've ever looked in your patches.lock, but there's even some information about like patch provenance, like where did this patch come from? Why is it in my project?
Okay.
Which helps with debugging a little bit. There's a freeform patcher. You can write arbitrary commands.
So when you say provenance, like it will tell you if it came from a mirror or something, or local, or do you mean something else?
So like this patch was defined in my root composer.json file versus it was pulled in because some dependency wanted it versus some other plugin defined some way to retrieve this patch and here's where it came from.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, no, that sounds really powerful. Also, if I recall correctly, there was a somewhat controversial direction I think that 2.0 took at some point, and I think you may have changed direction. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I remember seeing it's one of the few times I think I was in the issue queue for Composer Patches, and I don't even remember what it was, but I remember reading through the thread. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Composer Patches has a few different ways to get patches for your project, like to resolve them is what it's referred to in 2.0. So you can look in your composer.json, you can look in your patches.json. And one of the things that the 1.0 did that a lot of people relied on was that your dependencies can define patches for your root project. So you can, for instance, pull in a contrib module that defines a core patch. So like this version of this module requires this change to Drupal core. So I removed that functionality to get patches from dependencies because it seems it seems kind of simple. Like, well, we'll just look in this other places or in this other place for patches and pull them into the main list. But that kind of opens a can of worms.
Because that requirement can come from a patch itself. So you have to like loop over it, right? Is that the issue?
It can't actually.
Oh, it can't.
And we can come back to that. But
Okay.
you can't actually apply patches to your like local composer.json files, because the metadata that Composer uses to figure out all your stuff is like that's all
so it
pre-computed
resolves
and
it
loaded.
before. So that's just like the Okay, so it's the same issue as the lenient plugin solving, because the version constraints happens before it installs.
Exactly.
Okay, that's good to know. That's a whole class of bugs that you probably would want to handle anyway. That sounds good.
Yeah, but it's more like supply chain stuff, So if a module's repository got compromised, or even like some random PHP dependency you were pulling in that doesn't live on Drupal.org, if that repository got compromised, they could define a patch for Drupal core that, I don't know, like enables PHP input for all of your comment fields or whatever, right? Like
we just saw that with NPM.
You could really do some damage
6 months ago. Yeah, we just saw that with NPM 6 months ago. Same issue. Yep.
Yeah. So you could really do some damage if you compromised some dependencies repository, for one thing. And then the other thing is, what if your root project defines the same patch? You get to deduplicate them. And how do you know it's the same patch? Well, okay, you can take a SHA-256 some of it, but you have to get both patches first, and then you have to decide which one you're going to apply and which one you're going to complain about.
Yeah.
Are you going to silently drop the second one, or are you going to tell the user the patch doesn't apply? What if that dependency applies a patch that conflicts with one of your existing patches that isn't the same patch? It's really difficult for people to debug that kind of thing because the definitions for the patches weren't visible in the first place. They live in some third-party location.
And so how did you make the decision to pull that feature back in? Because my understanding is that you heard the feedback from the community and decided to add that back in. Is that correct?
Yeah. I got a lot of feedback on that. People were not happy with it. They were not happy with workarounds about like, I had an idea for maybe we'll have a command line thing to pull in, like to just import the patches into your local patches.json or whatever. That kind of workaround wasn't gonna do it because people would forget to do it. Yeah, it was mostly like we really can't live without this, and that was almost unanimous, I would say.
Interesting.
I have a dumb question, point of clarification here, right? So like, does this process require that the module or whatever project you're including be using Composer patches to pull in those patches for those dependencies?
Yes. Well, so your root project has to have Composer patches. It won't work if a dependency says, I'm going to add Composer patches and then define this patch on core, right? Like that. The root project has to have.
So I guess I meant that the other way around. Like if I'm building a Drupal site, right? My Drupal project, my project has Composer patches installed, and I'm installing my own patches. If a dependency, say, I don't know, we'll just use web forms as an example, right? Defines patches using Composer patches, then this process would work. But what if I'm using another package or module that doesn't define patches in this way? Then they're just going to be ignored.
Yep, just ignored. It's kind of a if the dependency defines package, then we'll use it.
But that being said, Composer patches is a pretty widely used kind of patching standard at this point for Composer. So like a lot of people are using that as their kind of patching methodology, right?
Yeah. So the dependency patches was a thing. They came up with a way to make it a little bit more friendly in terms of maintenance, and that's what's in the repository today.
Cool. And you went over this a little bit, but explain patches.lock.json and why that was such a big change.
Yeah. So in Composer Patches 1, you could have an external patches.json, but functionally it was the same as if you had just inlined all your patch definitions directly into your composer.json. So the only real place where there was any kind of like integrity checking in X was, does the composer.json match the composer.lock? So if you like updated your patch definitions, it would change the text content of composer.json and you'd get an updated SHA-256 or SHA-1. I can't remember which one Composer uses for the lock hash. But that was about it. And that's kind of a problem because a lot of people apply patches directly from, say, a GitHub or GitLab issue, right? If you, or I'm sorry, a pull request. Or if you go to a pull request and tack on .diff or .patch, it gives you a ready-to-use patch. But that patch will change as that pull request changes, as the contents of that branch change. So the patch that you added yesterday could be different today. And that's a problem for people who want their builds to pass reliably or to know what's actually going into production. So patches.lock.json, for every patch that you download, will, number one, store a copy of the patch locally in a cache so that it doesn't have to go re-download them every time. So it speeds up your builds a little bit. And then number two, it will compute a checksum from that hash and store it in this patches.lock.json so that you know if it ever changes.
And we will say very loudly and clearly right now, you should never be using these as your end, as the patch, unless you're just like testing it, right? So I will, when I'm testing a patch for a fix or something, I will use the .diff or .patch version. I'll test it. And then before I even push it up to dev, I'm downloading that file to a local copy. And you should always, always, always do that. You should never, unless you're actively testing something, you should never be pointing to an online resource for a patch like that, because like Cameron said, that can change. And it can be, aside from being able to break your site, it can be a security issue. It can be, I mean, there's all sorts of problems with it. I'm glad you support it because it makes testing these things a little bit easier. But you know, you should never do this in production or even like a staging site. You should always use a local patch. That would be a flag. Actually, that's a question. Is there a flag that I can add to my CI that will fail any remote patches in case I forget to? Because I do occasionally forget and catch it in code review or something. That would be a nice flag.
No, there's not. And
I would be feature request.
I'd be interested in potentially adding something like that, but I would soften that recommendation personally. With the lock file, it's not as big of an issue in 1.x.
That's true.
Yeah, because I think traditionally I would put...
You'll know if those patches change.
Like a Drupal.org patch, that is not going to change. Whereas GitLab, adding .diff, that would change. So what is your, what do you recommend now? So do we download the diff, put it locally, or with 2.0, do we, depend on the hash to verify changes? What do you recommend?
Do what works for your workflow, which is kind of a non-answer, but
right.
It's the safe.
It's no longer unsafe. It's no longer unsafe to depend on those .diff or .patch URLs. It's just probably going to cause you a headache because that pull request will likely change at some point.
And so the process now is...
But at that point, the critical thing is that you're alerted to that change.
You're alerted, yeah. And so it has a hash. It compares it. You mentioned there's a cache too. Can you go over that again? Because the... Yeah.
So Composer has its own download cache, and we just reuse that. Rather, in 1.x, it was reaching out to the internet and downloading your remote patch file every time, and then it would apply it to your patch, or to your package rather.
But that's only local. So if you push this to a CI pipeline, it's not going to have that cache. Yeah. The hash is going to fail, and then you're going to be alerted the build will fail. That's what should happen, right? Cool.
Right.
Well, I imagine, don't you cache in the same place that the Composer cache lived? So if you have a cache, a lot of my clients, I set up a CI cache and we'll dump it like weekly or something. So if we have multiple builds in a day, it will be faster. So I imagine that patches are cached in the same location, right?
They are,
yeah. So you still can get that benefit even on CI.
So it'll either apply the old patch. It'll either apply the old patch, in which case you've already reviewed and approved it, or it'll try to apply the new patch, in which case it'll complain loudly and you'll have to review and approve it.
Cool. Very nice.
That's how I like my complaints, loudly. 2.0, right, moves to Git patching as opposed to the patching mechanism that was in 1.0, right? Why that change? Why was it important to move to Git patching?
Well, so the patch utility on your command line is very likely not the same between machines. Macs ship with BSD patch. A lot of Linux distributions ship with GNU patch. Some Linux distributions ship with like the version of patch that's included with BusyBox, which is different. There's a few other versions out there, but importantly, they behave differently and have varying levels of success in actually applying a patch. By contrast, every version of Git since 2015 or something is pretty bulletproof as far as patch application goes. It handles binary patching better. It handles renames better. It can handle conflict resolution a little bit better. Has different merge algorithms that you can try in case something goes sideways. And importantly, it's available pretty much everywhere in the same state in sort of a reliable way. So the intent was to make it, going back to if you tell it to do the thing, it should do the thing mindset. We want it to apply the patch when you tell it to apply the patch. Git was kind of the best way to do that. I had considered other ways to do this, and you can actually still implement this with some of the extension points that are in 2.0. I had considered shipping a cross-platform build of GNU patch so that we had something reliable that just shipped with Composer Patches itself. If you've looked at the Cosmopolitan C project, it does you can build a binary that runs on Mac, Linux, and Windows, all in one executable.
That sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah. So I worked with their maintainer a little bit to get patch running in that system. It just didn't end up being the right thing. You'd have to download a binary that's several megabytes with every composer install, and I didn't want to do that. Also considered it a pure PHP implementation of patch. It wouldn't be good, but it would work everywhere, kind of. And that kind of is why we didn't do it. So Git was really the only candidate.
Yeah, so it makes sense. Git's widely used. Everybody, and at least now everybody's kind of using the same thing, right? Which I imagine makes your life as a maintainer a little bit easier because you're if you're having a problem, at least everybody's using the same sort of process, right? What happens if you don't have Git? Does it require it? Does it say hey, you got to install Git in order to use this? How does that? What does that look like?
2.0 requires Git.
Got it.
Okay. It's a hard requirement. You can disable that particular patch applier and add your own, but the core plugin requires Git.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
Interesting. Well, there's also before I ask the next question, there's an issue going through the Drupal issue queue that you may or may not want to chime in on, which is the idea is to remove all the test files from the releases, right? So Drupal 12.0, if you download it from Composer and not the dev version, you're not going to get any test files. And the idea is that there would be a way to update the diffs so that the diffs only have kind of the functional changes, not the test files. But I imagine there will be some confusion as that rolls out. But one of the ideas is we want to be able to organize tests a little bit better, move them around, but we don't want to break thousands and thousands of patches doing that. So the only way to have more flexibility is to be able to kind of just shift things around without having them in Git or in the release package, which actually brings me to a side question. When somebody specifies a patch, does Composer need to download a different asset for the original package, or is it still? Because I know you can specify using source or like a tar. Mm-hmm. Does it need to download the source version of whatever package version you're downloading in order to apply it, or does it have a way to handle it if it's just like a tarball?
No, not always. You can. So if you already have a Git checkout on disk, Composer Patches will just CD into that directory and Git apply your patch. If it was downloaded from a tarball or whatever, and Composer calls this a distribution package. Mm-hmm. If it was a distribution package, it will CD into that directory, run a Git init, and then Git apply, and then delete that Git directory.
Okay.
So it's kind of like faking it.
It's so funny. That's so obvious as you're saying. As you started saying it, I realized what the solution was. But I mean, it's clever. It's clever. Can you tell us a little bit more about any new APIs or features that a developer might want to know and start incorporating into their workflow? For me, it sounds like the patches.json is something to look into. But is there anything else that you're trying to get the word out about?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing is Composer Patches has like a proper documentation site now instead of just one mega README. So that's docs.cweegans.net. It's linked from the Composer Patches repository. But there's a whole section in there about the API. And there's kind of I guess sort of three things to be aware of. One of them is the patches.lock.json. We're kind of considering that like read-only for external uses. But there's some useful information in there. The other two things, in my opinion, are a little bit more interesting. So there's capabilities and events. And these are both things that Composer provides. Capabilities are analogous to Drupal's plugin system. So in Composer Patches case, you can define a new resolver capability, a downloader capability, or a patcher capability. And respectively, those are how do I know what patches to apply to my project? How do I know how to get them? And how do I know how to apply them?
So if you have like a private hosting location for your patches or something that needs some sort of authentication or something, you could create your own downloader plugin that handles the authentication?
Sure. Or
okay.
I've seen projects where their patches it's a patch directory, but it's managed in like some corporate Perforce server or something.
Okay.
And they have to jump through some hoops to like pull that down first or whatever. You could define a downloader to go grab it from Perforce if you wanted to.
Awesome.
The resolvers would be things like I can find patch definitions in my composer.json. So that's one resolver. I can find patch definitions in my patches.json. That's another resolver. Or in my dependencies. That's another resolver. So those are the three core resolvers. Okay. But you could also say, I'm a module maintainer and I want to test my module with the, top 10 most commented things in my issue queue. And like go write a resolver to go like look at the Drupal.org APIs and pull those down or whatever. Or
interesting.
The resolver is what makes the decision on, is the patch in or out.
Okay.
Feels like it could be an interesting way to do version testing for modules, right? So like, hey, all the patches that are tagged with like, Drupal 12, Drupal 11, whatever, go get those, apply them, and like, let's see what happens, right?
Yeah, exactly. If you write the right resolver, you can definitely do that. I know some people are doing like PHP 8.4 to 8.5 upgrades, and they have, for whatever reason, different patches on different versions of PHP. So you could write a resolver that selectively includes patches for different versions of PHP if you wanted to.
That's pretty clever too. You've said a couple times now who's we when it comes to Composer Patches? Who are the other contributors?
So that's a bad habit that I'm trying to get rid of actually. So we, in the cases where I've used it, is likely referring to myself and the community have agreed.
Okay.
That this is the way.
Okay, I wouldn't say that's a bad habit. I just want to know if there was anybody in particular you wanted to shout out, but makes sense.
There is actually, now that you ask. Dane Powell is actually the other maintainer on. He committed a couple things and took over maintenance when life got a little too much for me a little while back. So he took over and sort of bridged the gap. So thanks, Dane.
Awesome.
He still has commit access actually. So if I don't know, if I win the lottery and never want to touch PHP again or whatever, like this plugin can keep going.
Good to know.
And you talked about capabilities. Can you give an example of events and how we would use that?
Yeah. So events, there are a handful of them. I don't remember them all offhand, but there's a class in the project that lists sort of all the different places where you can hook in and respond. And this is more analogous to Drupal hooks than plugins. So I know
it looks like Symphony too. Sort of like is that in Composer core, this like patch infrastructure that's somewhat just like event subscriber oriented?
The event subscriber and event broadcast plumbing, that's all provided by Composer. Same thing with the capabilities. Capabilities are how most Composer plugins work, actually. You have to define a capability and a class that implements it.
I see.
So the events are to hook into things that aren't easily replaceable by capabilities. So you could say like, before I apply this patch, I want to verify something. I don't know.
Nice.
You could also use
but
there's
notification. I want to say half a dozen or a dozen of them or something.
You could also use it for like a notification system or something like, hey, is there like a first time this patch is applied event or something in an environment? Because then you could publish a report or something, I presume.
There's not really the notion of like the first time a patch is applied is just like applied or not.
Okay. You could still track that.
Yeah. I mean, you could certainly subscribe to all of the pre-patch apply or post-patch apply events and gather them up and then show a report at the end of your Composer run. Sure.
Very cool.
There were a couple of users that were doing this in 1.x. This actually existed for a couple of things in 1.x, but it's much more robust in 2.0.
And so core Composer is basically extending the same Symfony libraries that we're used to in Drupal for the event subscriber stuff. I mean, it looks basically the same. Is that right?
It looks the same. I don't know what they're using under the hood. Like my integration point is under a Composer namespace, not a Symfony one. So I'm assuming that it's probably a Composer like specific thing.
Okay.
Interesting. But it is very similar to the Symfony event dispatcher.
Cool.
Yeah, it looks like Composer does use some Symfony things, but it looks like they're all related to the console and process. I don't see that they're actually extending the event dispatcher at all from Symfony. But maybe it's a dependency of one of the other dependencies that they're using. Who knows?
Yeah, could be.
Cool.
Whole lot of use of these APIs, but the capabilities are there.
Yeah, I started looking at the Composer source code, and then it's like almost like this weird rabbit hole of like, how does Composer use Composer? With the
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, so moving right along, I've got a lot of sites that I need to update to 2.0. And obviously you've got the new docs site, which is super helpful. What else should I be aware of? Like, what are the big gotchas?
For the most part, it should just work. You shouldn't really have to do a whole lot in terms of changing your patch definitions or anything like that. There's new stuff that you can sort of opt into. As an example, 1.x had the sort of compact patch definition where it was, the description and the URL, and that's about it. In 2.0, you can have sort of an expanded definition where you have the title and the description, but you could also, if you wanted to, specify your own SHA-SUM for the patch. You can specify some extra information. There's a section in the docs about this, but you can say like the issue tracker URL where this thing came from, and that just gets attached to your patch's sort of extra metadata that gets stored in the log file. So if you have like internal ticketing or whatever, you can sort of say this patch came from this ticket.
Nice.
Okay.
And then there was one other thing, the patch depth.
Yeah, what is depth?
Yeah. So if you use like the patch utility, you can do like patch-p1 or -p2 or whatever. That's the depth flag. And it basically what that does is it strips off leading components of the file path before applying the patch. So if your patch is changing something in like core modules system, a patch depth of 3 would be like I'm applying this relative to the root of the system module.
Okay.
I never read the man page, and now I know how that works.
Yep. Very cool.
I always just, I either apply a patch with Git, or if using the patch like P1, I just like, oh, that's just what you use. I never actually delve into the docs there. So thanks for clarifying that.
Sure thing.
Yeah. So the other thing, go ahead.
That was one of the things that actually went away in Composer patches 2 is the depth guessing. So we use P1 all the time because that's what git apply uses.
Gotcha.
Unless you specifically tell it to do something different. And there's a utils class where there's a list of packages that have different depth values. So Drupal core uses P2 by default without you having to do anything. And like other packages can go in and add to that list if they want to. You just open up a request.
Is that P2 because it's in a web root typically, like all the modules and core and stuff is not in the root where your composer.json is?
It's an artifact of how Drupal started using Composer. So like that core directory is a subtree split, but the actual Drupal, like the Drupal repository itself, like core is nested in a directory inside of that repository.
Sure.
So you need to strip off that sort of leading directory to get stuff applied to relative to the root of the core directory.
Okay.
That's what most people were doing in 1.x, and it just kind of worked because X would guess which depth to use. But it would fail in situations where you were just like adding a file, because that works at any p-value.
I personally love the extra item there. I'm looking at the documentation right now and I'm like, extra, hold on a second. I can actually put a link to the Drupal issue in here, which previously I would just kind of extrapolate it from the path to the patch, which is sometimes very annoying. But now being able to include that right in that patch definition is super helpful.
One thing I want to do maybe eventually, or maybe somebody will beat me to it, is I think you can hook into an event that's like post patches resolve. So like we've already figured out all the patches that we're going to install, and so I want to write an event handler that will go through and look at all of the patches from Drupal.org, like try to parse out the issue number and then automatically append that information to the extra section in your patches.lock. So like doing that in an automated way is kind of difficult, and I just haven't had time to sit down and do it, but I think it's doable.
That'd be cool. I also actually just had an idea, like it would be cool if, not to add more work, but if somebody in the community wanted to build this feature, like it'd be cool if it was able to kind of like, if you had that extra value in there, if it could say, hey, parse it. If the issue is fixed and this patch has been applied to the code base, like ask the user if they want to remove it, right? Because that would like,
yeah,
I don't know. It would help me when I go to update a module and it's like, nope, you can't update the module. And then I go, oh, right, I have a patch. I got to remove the patch and check to see if the patch has been applied, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
In speaking
of
that great idea, Cameron, I'm wondering, does Composer Patches have a roadmap? Is there a 3.0 version kind of bubbling there somewhere? And if so, what's on the roadmap?
Well, based on how long 2.0 took to come out, I would be publishing 3.0 from the grave or some point in the next century or whatever. So I'm not planning on a 3.0 right now. I don't really even have a roadmap for future releases in the 2x series. It's more or less just what do people need. And I also need to sort of balance that with what can I maintain. So that's part of the reason why we have the API capabilities in 2.0. Is, some features don't need to actually live in the core plugin, but as long as you have a way to do it, that's like, I feel like I'm sort of satisfying the bargain there.
Okay. And it's BSD 3, so fully open source. Is that accurate? And so if somebody wants to contribute, what's kind of your preferred method? Is it kind of creating a fork on GitHub and adding a pull request for it? Should they open an issue to discuss it first? How do you want people to try to contribute back?
Yeah, issues are best. The best place to start anyway. Like, let's talk about it first. It may be that the thing that you want to do is doable without changes to the plugin at all.
Yeah.
It might be you need to write a composer plugin or whatever. And that's something I can kind of get you pointed in the right direction on. But if it is an actual change to composer patches, like I'm certainly willing to talk about it and discuss how to approach it and whatever. And then, a pull request is kind of the next step.
Do you do paid support for people with more complex needs? Or
I do. So that's mostly handled through GitHub sponsorship. You can also just email me and we can figure something out.
Okay.
But I'm happy to.
Is that most
help
of
if people need help?
Is that most of how you get funding for this, is through the GitHub scholarship, or do you have other funding sources that help support this? I mean, it's obviously a critical tool for Drupal, and we want to keep it around.
No, there's not really any funding for it. I don't even really do that much Drupal anymore. So
yeah,
or PHP for that matter.
Oh,
so
really?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really any funding or official support or anything for it.
Just a passion. Nice.
I mean, it's neat to maintain a big open source project. So like I'm going to keep doing it as long as I can. But
that's awesome.
But ultimately, it's not really aligned with like my professional direction or anything anymore. So it's kind of when I have the time and energy to work on it.
Cool.
Which is fair enough.
Well, thank you again for that, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. Thank you. And again, sorry it's taken us so long to get you on the show. But Cameron, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on the socials with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
Do you want to be a guest on Talking Drupal or our new show, TD Cafe? Click the guest request button in the sidebar at talkingdrupal.com.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choose Become a Patron.
All right. Before we let everybody go, Cameron, if folks wanted to get a hold of you, talk about Composer Patches or any of the other projects that you're involved in, how best could they do that?
You can send me an email. That's linked from the About page on cweegans.net, or you can find me on Mastodon.
Cool.
Also on the About page on my website.
Awesome. Andy, what about you?
You can find me on dripyard.com or Andy G.
There you go. Nick?
You can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, Nicxvan.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me personally at picozzi.com, at John Picozzi on all the socials, and Drupal.org. And if you want to learn more about EPAM, you can go to epam.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Thanks a lot, everyone.